Welcome to Codex History of Video Games. I'm Mike Coletta.
And I'm Tyler Osby.
And we are finishing the book today. Wow.
This is our last episode on the Ultimate History of Video Games, Volume 2 by Stephen L. Kent. Go buy it because it's great. We don't talk about everything. We're not sitting here reading the book to you, but we do like to talk about the book.
We really do. And also, I guess we are going to do a retrospective next week. So it's technically not...
Okay.
It's the second to last episode, but this is the last one of like material because next week you're going to hear what we think about the book in different spots.
All right. So
You know?
This is our last sort of Cliff's Notes of the book, I guess. I don't know. You should read the book. There's a lot more in there than what we talk about.
This is the last book club entry with required reading, if you're treating it that way.
Yeah.
Because next week, we're just going to kind of go through each chapter and be like, what did we like? What did we not like? Like, what do we think? Is Chuck Norris a superhero? Things like that, you know?
Yeah, I think the myth of Chuck Norris is definitely a superhero. The man himself, probably not. I think he's a regular dude.
Regular guy.
Yep.
Puts his pants on one leg at a time, as they say.
When the eyes of the ranger are upon you,
you can't run and hide. You know what I mean?
Any wrong you do, he's going to see. That's the next part.
Oh, I'm sorry. But when you're in Texas, look behind you, because that's where the ranger's going to be.
There's a whole generation of people who just know that song, although I couldn't tell you the plot of a single episode of Walker, Texas Ranger. I know the song.
All I know is it always ended with a roundhouse kick. That's what because I used to watch it a lot as a kid, and it always ended with him roundhouse kicking somebody because that was his signature move.
Yeah. Great show. Was it? I don't remember.
Yeah, a solid theme song. It
did
definitely
have a good theme song.
It ruled daytime TV on cable for like 7 years, I would say. Just
Yeah,
always playing. It was the SVU, the Law and Order SVU of the early 90s.
You could just turn on like TNT at any point and watch like 6 episodes of Walker, Texas Ranger in a row. So Thanks for listening to Codex History of Walker, Texas Ranger.
What everyone always wanted.
But we gotta talk about this book. So we're on the last chapter. This is like our third time this is a long last chapter. It's all about games as art, and we kind of are on this section of game movies. And we talked last week about games that were made into movies, and now we're going to talk a little bit more about a really important movie in video game and movie history. So here we go, Mike. Do you know what? I have never seen Final Fantasy: The Spirits Within.
Me neither.
I've never seen it.
And that's weird to me because I thought as a Final Fantasy fan, you would have seen it for sure.
You would think that, and I probably should. And it's probably strange that we're about to talk about it without having seen it, but it is the next section of the book, so I guess it's about to happen. The movie is on HBO Max apparently, so maybe I'll watch it this week finally. I don't know, but so because I've never seen it, I can't say for certain, but I get the feeling that this is not a very good movie. But it is an important movie as far as technology goes.
This is like mocap, right? This is where like mocap really came in to the fray.
Yeah, and like CG stuff was starting to really come in. Like Toy Story had already existed, A Bug's Life had already come out. Like Pixar was making movies. I think the first Shrek movie had probably come out by the time Final Fantasy Spirits Within did. It was 2001. So like CG movies weren't new. But this one was like trying to be really realistic, and as we'll go into it, while the movie itself is not that good, it's really important technology-wise because they did a lot of really cool things in this movie. So we'll rewind a little bit into like how this movie came to be. So the Final Fantasy series is like super story-driven, and fans had been clamoring for a film for a long time because good stories make good films, right? And Final Fantasy games had good stories, or at least good stories as far as video games go. And with the release of Final Fantasy VII, the series was now in the public consciousness. It wasn't just like a niche game that some nerds were playing on their Super Nintendos, which is what Final Fantasy was before that. I know everybody loves Final Fantasy VI. You were a nerd if you played that game back in 1994. Sorry, not sorry. So Hironobu Sakaguchi persuaded Square to open a studio in Hawaii, mostly because he loved surfing, but also because he wanted to work on Final Fantasy things and he wanted to surf while he did it. And because he basically invented Final Fantasy, they were like, sure, open up a studio wherever you want. So this is where he came up with ideas for Final Fantasy 8, 9, and 10. But before working on any of those games in earnest, Sakaguchi wanted to answer the fans' call for a movie. And because he's a game developer and loves technology, he wanted to use these newfangled computer graphics technologies to make the movie. And so this is in about 1998 is where this movie's starting to come together. And CG people in 1998 were still a little janky. Toy Story had only come out 3 years earlier. And have you seen the humans in those movies, Mike? Like, just think back to the few times you see actual humans in that movie.
Sid looks scary. I mean, he's supposed to be scary, but even more scary than normal.
Yeah, but even like Andy and his mom, straight up nightmare fuel. And that's not even talking about the baby, Molly. Oh my gosh.
Nightmarish.
Yeah. Whoo. They did the best they could. They stylized it well. You know, it's not supposed to be a realistic movie, but the people were rough. The toys, they look great. They still look great. Although if you go back and watch that movie, it's definitely pretty janky.
Is that is it the Hidden Valley? No, that's a ranch company.
Uncanny
Valley.
Yeah.
Uncanny Hidden Valley. I'm so sorry, everybody.
So I don't know if the people in Toy Story hit the Hidden Valley because like they're just not really meant to look realistic. They just don't even look good as far as like stylized goes. Like the humans in The Incredibles look good, right? Because they're like stylized. That was like the first Pixar movie, I think.
Yeah, and that still holds
about
up.
Humans. Yeah, they're very stylized. Like they had sort of figured out the art style to make humans look good by then, but they hadn't figured it out for Toy Story, at least that first one. So yeah, it was people in those movies were not great. That was okay. It wasn't really about people. It was about the toys. But CG allowed for unparalleled creativity. And one didn't have to figure out how to make effects practically in a CG movie, like every movie from the past century had to. Suddenly, one was only limited by their imagination. And if they made the whole movie out of CG, then literally anything was possible, which was great for Final Fantasy because stuff gets weird in those games. Plus, with a sufficient budget, they could not only make a great movie, but they could push technology forward as well. So they set a huge budget of $70 million and began to hire the best in the biz at CG art, which wasn't a lot of people yet because CG art was still pretty new. So to make this game truly fit the Final Fantasy mold, Sakaguchi had to do something a little counterintuitive. He had to give it a whole new story. Because I'm sure I don't have to tell our listeners, but I'm going to anyway. Every mainline numbered Final Fantasy game is a self-contained story in its own world with its own characters. The games are only like very loosely connected by similar themes and like some gameplay elements, like items and spells are the same, so you kind of know what you're getting into. They got a lot of them have chocobos. They all have a character named Sid, who usually is some sort of mechanic who works on airships. But they're like, if you've been holding off on playing the award-winning Final Fantasy 14 because you didn't play the first 13, don't. That's not a very good reason to not play the newer ones. Like they're all separate. You're not going to get much out of it.
Can't you play the whole story of Final Fantasy 14 for free? Pretty much.
That's true. Up through the award-winning Heavensward expansion pack, Mike.
Wow. I didn't know you work for big Final Fantasy now. Gone so corporate, Tyler.
Yeah, well, you don't have to play all the other Final Fantasies, but you should. And actually for 14 specifically, there's a lot of like references and stuff. You'll get a lot out of having played them, but you won't be like lost in the story. It's not like it picks up from the end of 13 or anything. So anyway, the story was different for Final Fantasy. Even the composer was different, which was kind of starting to make it feel like maybe it wasn't a Final Fantasy story for some fans. And Sakaguchi was having a hard time with the movie studios too, because at this point, CG animation was still something that had only been used for kids' movies, like cartoons. Like we'd seen Toy Story, A Bug's Life, Shrek by this point. Like these are all sort of kids' movies, although they're all very good movies for all ages. I think they are especially sort of aimed at kids.
I loved A Bug's Life. That's a great movie. It's a solid movie. Ants?
Yeah. Ants, also good. Not as good as A Bug's Life.
Bug's Life is better than Ants, I agree.
Yeah, but Ants had Woody Allen, which was pretty cool. Is that cool?
Wasn't Ants Jerry Seinfeld?
No, that was B-movie.
That was B-movie. I'm getting my insect
getting
CG
your DreamWorks
movies confused.
Insect movies.
Yeah.
Yeah. So today, animation is animation is used to tell like all kinds of stories for audience. But back in the 90s, if it was animated, it was probably a kid's movie. But Sakaguchi wanted to make a CG movie for adults. And he didn't want to just do animation by hand the way Pixar movies had been done. He wanted to do something like super, super realistic. So he decided to use motion capture technology, which was still very new and hadn't been used for a feature film yet. So motion capture is where actors wear like special suits that capture their movement. They look like black spandex suits with like white ping pong balls on them that a camera looks at and then can like sort of make animation out of. And then that movement is then applied to computer-generated models later. So what it does is it makes for like much more realistic-looking animation than doing everything by hand, which is sometimes the right choice, especially when it comes to doing like ultra-realistic CG sequences, like what Final Fantasy Spirits was going to be for its entirety. So Kent brings up, interestingly at this point, that Acclaim Entertainment is one of the first companies to see the potential of motion capture technology. Remington Scott had built out an entire studio to work on the technology, but it didn't last very long. He tried to get Hollywood to pick up on the tech, but I think he was just ahead of his time. He wasn't very successful until he was, when Square called him up and hired him to be their director of motion capture. So he had to do a little bit of work to convince the animators that motion capture was the right way to go. I guess they weren't entirely convinced, probably because they had spent a lot of time learning how to do something by hand. And then someone else comes in and says, I can do this easier and better and without you probably. And it took them a little while to get on board with that. But I think it's the right choice for a realistic movie. And sometimes hand animation is the right choice for a stylized movie. Like everything Pixar does is hand animated. I don't think they use any motion capture technology at all.
Wow. That seems very tedious.
Yeah. I think it's part of their charm and why you can like sort of tell when it's a Pixar movie, I think. But for humanoid characters shooting for realism, it's cheaper, easier, faster. It's just better to do motion capture. There are no downsides. And the detail on the models and animations used for Spirits Within was like insane for the time. 400,000 polygons were used on the main protagonist of the movie. And at the time, people actually thought she was a real person. Like that's how good the CG was. When you look at it now, you can tell it was CG. But people hadn't seen so much CG by then that they could like spot a fake human a mile away like we can now. It's a little hidden valley now, I think, if you go back and look at screenshots of Spirits Within. I think it's interesting how people sort of become smarter in that way. Like if you took a movie like that, a CG movie, and showed it to someone in the 60s, they'd just think it was real. They'd think it was filmed. There would be nothing weird about it at all. And while I don't think CG is like quite there yet, there was genuine worry in the 90s that it would eventually replace real actors, or even creepier, bring back dead actors, which we kind of have done to some extent, especially with those like Star Wars movies like Grand Moff Tarkin in Rogue One.
Yeah, I thought Grand Moff Tarkin looked better than Princess Leia in Rogue One, though. Rogue One, Princess Leia looked weird to me. But Grand Moff Tarkin, I don't know if it's because of the aesthetic of him just wearing like a gray suit.
He didn't move a lot, yeah.
Yeah, he didn't really move a lot, but yeah, I thought that the Princess Leia, young Princess Leia, looked strange.
Yeah, the Tarkin one was good. You couldn't have brought back Peter Cushing for that, mostly because he's dead, but also because, as noted in the book, he would have been like 113 years old or something.
True.
Well, maybe not that old, but he was going to be well over 100 years old, so you wouldn't have been able to bring it back. But Leia, Carrie Fisher was fooled by herself at the end of Rogue One when she thought they had like found old footage from the old movies or something and like manipulated it.
Really?
So yeah, so if it's good enough for Carrie Fisher, good enough for me.
Yeah.
That's right. The cast of Spirits Within, though, was really good. It had Alec Baldwin, Ving Rhames, James Woods, Donald Sutherland, Steve Buscemi, and Keith David, which is like a lot of really high-name actors and probably where a lot of their budget went to, I guess. And even Ebert liked it when it came out. He said it looked super good. It was like really realistic. He was like, the story's not great, but that's okay. It sort of serves this like visual feast that he was like really into. But other reviewers were like not really on board. They're like, this story's bad. Movie looks great, sounds great, but the story's bad. And that's, if the story's bad, then you got a bad movie, right? That's the whole point.
Wasn't there kind of an argument too about how they didn't they didn't include some of the Final Fantasy things? Like there were no chocobos or gunblades in it. It was like all new.
Yeah, it was a whole new deal, and it didn't have a lot. There was a character named Sid, I think, and that's like kind of the closest thing it had. I don't know what the themes of the movie are, like the story themes, if they touch on a lot of Final Fantasy themes, which is usually like a group of ragtag misfits bound, like forming together to take on a larger evil. So maybe the movie's about that, but like it's pretty loosely connected to Final Fantasy and sort of feels like maybe they just slapped like a popular name onto a movie to do it, or they tried to make a Final Fantasy movie and ended up doing something different. Like it doesn't need to be a Final Fantasy movie, I guess, is like kind of the deal there. So, and a lot of movie reviewers kind of talked about that. They're like, the story's not that great, and it, even if you're a Final Fantasy fan, it's not that great. And they did not do well at the box office. They lost almost $50 million on this movie.
Wowzers.
Yeah. So, I find that strange that like this bad story like meant that it flopped, because I think Avatar in 2009 tried to do the same thing, like be this visual feast of a CG movie about 8 years later, and it also had a bad story, and it sold like hotcakes and gangbusters, and that's not a very good movie. It's not.
I agree with you 100%. I never understood that Avatar people liked it, to the point where when I heard they were making an Avatar land in Disney World, I was like, why? Yeah.
That's dumb. I don't care. I didn't care about that movie. I saw it one time and I was like, this is dumb. I don't know. The CG was good, but like, I don't know. Anyway, that movie was like the top grossing movie forever until, I don't know, something else came along. But yeah, I don't get it. Yeah, anyway, Square lost a bunch of money on Final Fantasy Spirits Within. So that's kind of where this section ends, where it's him talking about CG starting to be used to replace actors like we just talked about. They've got like Arnold Schwarzenegger and Terminator, and then all the stuff we talked about in Rogue One. There's like a bunch of other examples too. But the point of all this is like Spirits Within, not a great movie, but it did convince the industry and the public about how good CG and motion capture technology could be. So Remington Scott, the guy who basically invented this motion capture stuff over at Acclaim, and like kind of they shut it down, and like he didn't really have a good time until Square called him up again. His career took off again like a rocket right after Final Fantasy Spirits Within. He helped tons of studios do motion capture after that. So even though the movie itself wasn't very good, it's like actually really a really important movie in cinema history. And so I guess for that reason, I should probably go watch it, right? We should probably watch this movie. It's an hour and 40 minutes or something. Maybe we should do a commentary.
Oh, well, I was just thinking about our checklist from last episode.
Oh, yeah.
We got to do the checklist. And, I got some other movies to add to the checklist as well, Tyler.
Oh, great.
Are you ready?
I feel like there's some movies we could skip in this next part, but
no.
You tell me. Okay, all right.
We're not skipping them. If we're going to be complete, we got to do it. So I looked up how to pronounce this name according to a YouTube video. It's Uwe Boll. It's spelled Uweboll. If you're unfamiliar, Uwe Boll is a German director and pretty interesting guy. PhD in literature, is an amateur boxer. And by amateur, I mean like, not pro, but still a very good boxer.
Sure. Like he could beat anybody up.
Not a hobbyist, but could beat most people. And is described in the book as a serial entrepreneur. And he was not looking to make movies about video games. But when he coordinated with Sega and the screenwriter Mark Altman, he just wanted to make a zombie movie. And this was his first real thing. And I want to focus on like the serial entrepreneur and businessman aspect of Uwe Boll for a bit. That's really what influenced Boll's movies. Like he weighted his movies a lot more on budget and producing the movie in a way that would make money. And so when his first film that he made with Sega and writer Mark Altman, House of the Dead, that's a very famous Sega arcade game.
Yeah.
I'm sure you've seen it if you've been to an arcade in the last 20 years. It's there.
Yep.
But he claims he made the movie on a budget of $8 million. Meanwhile, Box Office Mojo says $12 million. I don't know who's correct, but still it's really low. To the point where they made money on the movie. And they filmed it in Vancouver, which is a city with very big financial incentives for the film industry, a lot of tax breaks. And instead of doing the giant mansions and evil-looking laboratories that are in the arcade game, they focused this movie on a private island in the Northwest, like the Pacific Northwest, where I live, on a private island. And it was like the big spring break party of the year, is what it was. That's how they set up the movie, because it's way cheaper that way. They just went to an island in British Columbia, filmed, and it worked.
That makes sense.
Many Sega executives, including Peter Moore and Rikiya Nakagawa, who was the head of Sega WoW, and Sega WoW is the studio that created House of the Dead, they played zombies in the film, so it was cool. And the movie was super campy, which Boll said matched the video games, but critics panned the film. And critics really panned all of Uwe Boll's films. And that's why we're talking about him right now, because boy, oh boy, did they not like him. They really,
he's got a bit of a reputation.
He really does. And I don't know if it's deserved. Like, I honestly haven't really heard of him until I read about him in the book, because I haven't seen any of these movies. Have you seen any of his movies?
I've seen, I'd need to see like a full list, but I've seen a few. I think he made the Blood Rain movie. He did make the Blood Rain movie. He also made a Blood Rain 2 as well. Oh, I don't think I've seen that one, though. I don't remember the first one being very good. I need to look up a list of Uwe Boll movies.
Yeah, it's also important to note, they say this, I'm going to read a quote here on page 524, like, Boll considers House of the Dead a success, and he's really looking at the financial side of things. So this is just the beginning of the quote on page 524. Quote, House of the Dead made around $11 million in the US in the box office, and then it made $28 million in DVD sales. Worldwide revenues were another $10 million. So overall, it was successful. End quote.
Not bad.
Yeah, and I get where he's coming from with this, because I feel like this is one of those qualifiers in games too, where we're like, is the game a success because it's good or because it's financially doing well? Because I think you could argue with some bigger games, like a Call of Duty stands out to me, where even if a game might not be that great, it's going to sell really well because it's a Call of Duty game. And I feel like Uwe Boll is making movies in that mindset, which is fine. This is a whole thing we could get into. But yeah, so Boll is making House of the Dead. It came out, did well financially, destroyed by critics, even though it was noticeably campy and the director is admitting that it's campy. Another movie stands out to me like this too, Punisher Warzone. Did you ever see that movie?
I never saw that movie, no.
So it was panned by critics. I saw it in theaters. My friends and I all thought it was terrible. And then I rewatched it and I read an interview with the director, and they were going for that like crazy, gory, campy movie. And I'm like, okay, well, with that in mind, they were successful. You know, I just went in with the wrong mindset, especially if you go in thinking like Marvel movie wise.
Yeah. Yeah. When you go in knowing what it's supposed to be, it's different than, you know, if your expectations are not met.
Totally. So that's where Uwe Boll is at. Meanwhile, some critics like Roger Ebert refused to review any of Boll's movies. Just didn't do it. And
I don't blame him.
Boll got really upset by the reviews. And this is probably the most entertaining point of this section. He challenged critics that gave him bad reviews to boxing matches. And four of the critics didn't know that Boll was like an experienced good boxer and actually agreed. And he beat them all in a row.
I guess that means he makes good movies then.
Yeah, so two of them didn't even last the first round. He knocked them out.
Wow.
And then apparently he knew through someone, Ron Howard. And Ron Howard actually contacted him and was like, hey, good for you. Like, we've always wanted to do that, but we just don't know how to
just
box.
Like beat the crap out of these critics.
Yeah, exactly. And so I'm like, hey, you got Ron Howard on your side. You know, you can do no wrong, apparently. Yeah. So undeterred, though, by these critics, and obviously after winning the boxing matches, it has to feel pretty good, Boll continued to make video game movies. This was kind of his thing. He made Blood Rain in 2005, In the Name of the King, Blood Rain 2 Deliverance. But the one he's probably most known for is Postal.
I feel like I may have seen Postal, but I can't remember anything about it. So maybe I just remember hearing a lot about it back in the day.
Yeah, I haven't played Postal, by the way. Have you played the game Postal? Because the game...
No, but a new one just came out.
Yeah, it's very violent, and it was very controversial at the time. And it was, in fact, one of the games that Senator Joe Lieberman used to demonstrate like senseless violence in video games, ruining our children, yada, yada, yada. But I think if Lieberman actually thought the game was bad, I really wonder if he watched the movie, because the movie it went even farther. Postal was known for going over the top, so Boll was like, well, I'm going to take this movie and make it even more over the top. Yeah,
he's just going to do what the game wanted to do, but in movie form.
It opens with terrorists calling Osama bin Laden, asking them if they're going to get their virgins in heaven right before flying planes into the Twin Towers.
Wow. Okay. That is a choice to make for an opening.
Yep. Really goes for it. So, and again, I haven't seen the movie, but I feel like this is one we have to watch if we're going to do this video game movie list, because it's so
I guess you're right.
Controversial. Also, funny thing, the way that Boll ended up doing Postal is Vince Desi, the creator of Postal, was contacted by a fan group in Germany for Postal that knew Uwe Boll, and they got him together. So that's how the movie worked. And as a fan group, that's got to be pretty cool. Like, you love a game, and you connect a director, and now they're making a movie out of it.
About the game that you love. That's cool.
Yeah, so this one's definitely got to be on our checklist of things we watch, I feel like.
Yeah, I'm down.
So while Boll is considered the second worst director of all time by Metacritic, only behind Jason Friedberg and Aaron Seltzer, who make the date movie, epic movie, and disaster movie parodies.
Oh man, those movies are terrible.
Kent points out that Boll actually has done some good movies, and they're not video game movies. That's what stands out. He wrote and directed the film Darfur, which won the New York International Independent Film and Video Festival Prize for Best International Film.
Wow,
and is pretty well regarded. So Boll can make good movies. I think we're just seeing a director that knows what he's doing on the business side of the movies for these video game films. Like, he's just going all in and trying to save money, and he doesn't care if these movies are good or bad. He's just trying to make a profit.
Sounds like he's mostly making movies, making money, except for the Postal movie, which had a budget of $15 million, according to Wikipedia, and only made $146,741 at the box office.
Yeah, I should tell you that there is a pattern after House of the Dead of it going steadily down and down and down.
Yeah.
Honestly, if he'd have made House of the Dead and probably stopped, he would have come out ahead, but then he kept going. But honestly, like, this is the thing. He had a 32 film career up to this point. He's made 32 films.
That's a lot.
Now.
Even if you're a bad director, that's an incredible amount of films to make.
Yeah, and while he partners with like game companies and investors and other studios, he's pretty much independent. Like, he doesn't live in Los Angeles. He actually says in the book, quote, I don't live in Los Angeles or play that game. Like, he's not what you would think of as like a Hollywood director in any way, shape, or form.
Well, good for him. And he gets to beat the crap out of his critics,
Yeah.
Respect to Uwe Boll.
And that's kind of how I feel too. Like, I haven't seen a lot of his movies. I don't know if you actually have more experience as a listener with Uwe Boll movies, please email us at codexhistorypodcast@gmail.com. And if there's a video game one that you think Tyler and I should specifically watch for like a good reason, we would love to watch it. I watched the trailer for House of the Dead, and it looks bad.
Yeah.
It looks really bad. But it looks like it could be entertaining.
Yeah. I think the only movie on this list that I've seen is Blood Rain. I don't think I've seen any of them. I might have seen Postal, but I might have also just like fever dreamed it. I don't know.
Well, I can guarantee you've seen some of the next movies, because the next movies that Kent talks about are pretty good, because he ends the chapter with what I think is a really good point that I didn't really think about, which is why we read this book. In the 1980s and 1990s, video games licensed movies to sell more copies. And now that the video game industry, since like the 2000s, has well surpassed the film industry in revenue, we're seeing a flip where movie studios are now producing films based on games. And they're successful. Like Rampage, based on the 1980s
also an
arcade
Uwe Boll
game.
movie. Actually, he did make a Rampage movie.
It brought in $480 million on a $120 million budget. Sonic the Hedgehog, the first one, I know the second one just came out.
A movie that I love.
Made $308 million on an $85 million budget. And my personal favorite, Detective Pikachu, made, I think it's actually $433 million on a $150 million budget.
Nice. That was a great movie.
Yeah, and I completely agree with Ken here. I think this is going to be the new normal, is that we're going to take video games that are popular and turn them into movies. Now, I never saw Rampage, but Kent points out that the only way that Rampage is like the video game Rampage is there's like a giant wolf and like the monsters match. You know what I mean?
Okay.
But everything else about it is different.
What were their names? Lizzie, George, and what was the wolf's name?
I loved the game Rampage too as a kid. I thought it was so fun.
Ralph. Lizzie, Ralph, and George. I like how they just have like regular people name.
Yeah, I love it. I thought Rampage the game was fun, really entertaining.
Me too. Love
Big
Rampage.
fan.
I played a lot of Rampage 64.
Now, I don't know if I even knew the objective. I know you're just supposed to destroy stuff.
I think that was it. I think that's all you're supposed to do.
It was a fun time as a kid, as a small child. I completely agree, though, with Kent in this sentiment. Do you agree?
Oh, yeah. I love Detective Pikachu. I think that I even like the Sonic the Hedgehog movie, both of them. I think they're pretty good. I mean, they're kids' movies, and like they're not like high cinema art, right? In that sense, although I do think all movies are art. But they're fun. You know what you're getting into. You sit down, you watch Sonic go fast and beat Dr. Robotnik. It's great. I had a lot of fun.
Yeah.
Both those movies.
Summer blockbusters, they're good time.
Yeah.
So Boll actually makes a point in the book, and it's kind of hard now because, I mean, he says that games like Halo or Call of Duty don't really need movies because the budgets, the action, the stories, they make them practically movies themselves. But we're seeing now with this Halo TV show that just came out that it can be done, I think.
Yeah, I need to keep watching it. I watched the first 2 episodes. I still haven't continued on the Halo show.
I'm all caught up. I think they're doing a good job. I think they're kind of filling in a lot of the gaps. And I know that the movies and the books and the video games, they're not lining up to a lot of people's standards that are really into Halo. But it's an entertaining TV show, and I like it.
I don't need it to like follow the same lore. Like, just tell a good story, and if you make changes on the way, that's fine. I don't have this need for like everything to like be perfectly fitting into the lore and all of that, Just tell me a good story.
Yeah, season 2 of Halo is there on the ring, and it's just every episode is named after a level in Halo 1, and it's just going through them.
It's just Halo 1. Yeah. Oh, I would like that. I think that would be awesome, but it's okay if they don't do that too.
I would probably skip the library episode, honestly.
Yes, absolutely. There's like 4 library episodes. It's just called the library part 1. Part 2, part 3, part 4, and it's just the same episode 4 times.
Yeah. Boom, roasted. Coming at you, Halo Combat Evolved. So, Kent ends the book referencing Roger Ebert and video games as art again. He says, quote, "What was once seen as a fad and a novelty has outgrown movies, music, and sports by incorporating them. Perhaps it is high time for the definition of art to evolve as well." End quote. And I think it's a good sum up. I do think that art already has evolved. I really do believe, and we're going back to this again, I know it's Tyler's least favorite argument, but if you ask the majority of the people in the world if they think video games are art, a lot of them would say yes at this point now.
Yeah, I think so.
I think it's very much a counterculture thing to be like, no, they're not, and just go for that. So I think he ended this chapter really well. I was super stoked that this was a chapter. We even talked about that with him in the interview we did with him, because I think it's really cool that he talked about this. Because it's something that people think about a lot is video games and movies and video games. With that, though, we'll talk more about it next week. But Tyler, what you been playing?
I've been playing a lot of Destiny still, trying to get I'm on that pinnacle grind so I can do some Grandmaster Nightfalls. I fell behind for a couple of weeks, so I'm just trying to catch up there. Iron Banner was great last week to get some more, 2 weeks ago, whenever that was, to get some more pinnacles. Played a little bit more Tunic, but that's kind of it. I've been just on a little bit of a video game hiatus. I haven't been playing as much as I used to. You know, sometimes it ebbs and flows. It's okay. I'll find something to catch my attention at some point, I'm sure. I do need to keep playing Pokemon Legends Arceus, but I just haven't had the drive to pick it up, you know?
Yeah, I've been there. I've very much had games this week where are quick. I played a lot of Valorant Spike Rushes just to get my little fix of video gaming in, and then I have other stuff going on, so I've been kind of busy. You got me into Wild Rift, though. I've been loving Wild Rift.
Wild Rift is fun.
Especially on a phone. I don't play phone games, really, but I'm playing this one, which I think is great.
It's nice. It's quick.
Yeah, so I also need to play more Tunic. I need to play more Dead Space. I have all these games to play, really. Witcher 3, everything. So, when I get back in it again, I'll get back in it. But for now, I'm kind of busy, so it's been kind of hard. But
that's all right.
Yeah, it's fine. It's the way life works. You go in and out. We have one email to read, though. Would you like to read it, or would you like me to read it? It's from James.
I'll read it. This one from James. James says, "Hey y'all, the subject is emotional damage." James says, "Hey y'all, when I was a kid, my sister deleted my save file for The Legend of Zelda: Ocarina of Time right after I beat the Water Temple because she was confused about what save meant in video game menus of the time. 20 years later, I still hold a small level of resentment toward her due to the apocalyptic mindset this sent my 8-year-old self into, as this was my first true heartbreak. Have you guys ever had a similar experience with games? Also, I just bought a Nintendo Switch and would love some game recommendations." James from Texas. He also attached a picture of a road in Texas called Jaybird Lane, and he says the attachment below may be NSFW for Tyler. This is a great picture of Jaybird Lane.
Jaybird Lane, we gotta go. We gotta go there. I have had experiences like that because I had a Nintendo 64 and I had save cards that would plug into the controller that would often become corrupted. So I lost. Yeah,
that was a problem.
I lost a lot of Tony Hawk saves. No, Pod Racer saved to the cartridge. Spider-Man. It was the Spider-Man 64 game. I lost progress on that all the time.
That game saved to the controller pack?
Yeah.
Why did Tony Hawk need that? Why didn't Tony Hawk save to the cartridge? That was silly.
I don't know, but it hurts so bad to the point where, I beat Tony Hawk, I think, 3 times on all characters as a kid because of that. Because I always just do it in an afternoon. You could beat it really quick.
Yeah.
And the Spider-Man game was always fun, but I definitely got to a certain point with Spider-Man. I knew I used cheats and stuff to get through it because there was a Captain Marvel suit for Spider-Man that made you invincible. And I used that a lot because it was so hard. Yeah, it was so hard. But what about you? Have you had any delete save experiences?
Yes, I had one. I think there's a point. There were probably several times where I may have accidentally overwrote a Pokemon save. Oh, I have an okay story about this. I don't want to set the hype too high here, but there was.
You said an okay story.
There was infamously in an issue of Nintendo Power magazine, there was like they used to do this thing called Pokemon Corner or Pokemon Center. They had like a whole like 3 or 4 pages dedicated to Pokemon every month. It was called Pokemon Power. That's what it's called. And they would have like a Q&A section, and people kind of would send in their questions. And somebody would ask like, "Oh, I've beaten Pokemon now. What is there for me to do now that I've caught them all? I've beaten the Elite Four a bajillion times. What do I do now?" And the answer that they gave was, "You can start the game over and keep all of your Pokemon. If you do new game, you'll keep all of your Pokemon." That's not true. And I lost a save file because of that. And I think a lot of people did. They had to print like a correction in the next issue where they were like, "Oh, actually, you don't keep your Pokemon." Because I was like, "Oh, cool. I want to start over and like blast through the gyms again. That sounds fun." And I did not keep all my Pokemon. And I was very sad about it.
That is a major journalistic flub on their part.
That was a real problem. And I seem to remember when they tried to correct themselves in the next issue, they were like, "Well, what we meant was you could catch them all again." Like, okay, that's not what you meant, but you were mistaken. But yeah, it didn't make me feel any better. So that felt pretty bad. I did lose a Banjo-Kazooie save once when I didn't understand how the delete save function worked, and I was like almost at the end of that game. It was very sad. And I remember my brother once lost a Metroid Prime save because while he was saving the game at like a save station, the power cut out and his save got corrupted and he had to start all over, and it was very sad.
Oh my.
Yeah.
Dude, that hurts me. That hurts my soul.
Yeah.
Both the Banjo-Kazooie and the journalistic mess up on their part. Because that must have made so many kids really sad.
Yes, absolutely. And I was like so stoked to blast through these gyms again, and they were like, "You can keep all your Pokemon," and that was wrong.
A total lie. Just a complete fabrication.
Yep.
Well, do we have any Nintendo Switch recommendations? I know we both have the same one probably, which is Mario plus Rabbids Kingdom Battle.
Yeah, that one's great. I love Mario 3D World too.
That's a great collection.
And the 3D All Stars.
Oh, 3D All Stars is the collection. 3D World separate. Yeah, Bowser's Fury is also fun to play. I'm a big fan of Bowser's Fury. It's very short, but it's sweet. Breath of the Wild, clearly.
Of course.
Pokemon Legends Arceus is great. I would also recommend highly, because I love this, the Link's Awakening remake that they did for Switch with the little plastic
guys. Good. The Skyward Sword remake is good too.
Oh, I played that. Yeah, that was great too. Yeah, there's a lot of good Switch games to choose from. I really want to play Kirby and the Forgotten Land.
Yeah.
Because I've heard that's fun. I don't know if it's like the most groundbreaking game of the year, but it sounds like it's really just fun, and I'm into that.
Yeah. Sounds like a good time.
Thank you for the email, James.
That's about it. Yeah, thanks, James.
So with that, we'll be back next week and we'll do our retrospective on the whole book and kind of talk about things that stood out to us. And if so, that means also if you have anything that stands out to you about the book that you want us to talk about on the podcast, send us an email, codexhistorypodcast@gmail.com. If you'd like to join our Discord, you can go to my Twitter profile @mecoletta, click on the pinned link at the top of my profile. That's an invite link that never expires. I'll also send you an email with a link too if you want. If that's easier, we can do it that way. Tyler's on Twitter @SneakerElf, ELPH. Talk to him about if you got scammed by that story too.
I don't tweet a lot, but I do check it. So if you tweet at me, I'll see it.
Yeah, so tweet at Tyler. And with that, I think we're done. Unless, of course, you're here for the real reason, which is to wish Tyler a happy birthday today.
Oh, happy that's true.
Birthday,
It'll be
Tyler.
yesterday. It'll be yesterday when y'all are hearing this. But yes, today on the 24th is my birthday. Thanks, everybody.
All right. With that, do you want to say bye to everybody?
Yeah. Goodbye, everybody.